In this video lecture, we're going to discuss illustrations. What are they? How do they work? And how can you use them best in technical writing? First off, we need to understand what is an illustration. To put it simply, an illustration is either a table or a figure. A table is something that has columns and rows. A figure is any other illustration. You can label illustrations with words other than figure. For example, you can say image, picture, drawing, things like that. That's fine. The big deal is you want to be able to differentiate between tables and figures because you treat the two things differently. Why do we want to use tables or figures? Good illustrations are going to help your readers in four major ways. They're going to aid comprehension. They're going to aid usability. They'll aid motivation, and they will also convey values. Let's talk about each of these things in turn. First off, aiding comprehension. The thing is that images show and not just describe relationships. For example, if I say that Cobb County is just outside Atlanta city limits, what does that mean? It gives us an idea of where it is, but we're lacking some things we'd like to know. For example, which direction? How close is it? Just outside? Is that, right up against it? Or is it a couple miles away? We don't know. If we show an image, though, and say, there's Atlanta city limits, there is Cobb County, that makes it a whole lot easier to understand. Illustrations also aid usability. They do three things. They break up long passages of text, they make specific kinds of information easier to find, and they also make information easier to understand. Let's talk about these things before we go on and show an example. Images breaking up long passages of text. Nobody likes the wall o' words. It's hard to get through. It's a little bit scary. If you can break up your tech writing into short bite-sized chunks and intersperse pictures in there, then your reader will be able to follow it a lot more easily. Making specific kinds of information easier to find, if you break things up and say, here, look, there's a picture of this, of what kind of thing we're showing. Oh yeah, fantastic. No problem. You can find it a lot more easily. And then make it easier to understand. Well, often you've heard the idea that a picture is worth 1,000 words. It's not, but it can be definitely worth 20 or 30 words. Here's an example. How to put together this weather vane. If we look at it, we don't have a wall of words. We have different types of information, like on the left is how the thing fits together, on the right is what you need to do to put it together, and it's also easy to understand too. So if we look at the left on how the assembly goes, if we said take the piece of metal with the N and the S and attach it, or stack it on top of the one that says W and E. Well, great. Stack it how? Do we in the middle, on the end? Are they supposed to be at 90-degree angles? Which one's on top? Etc., etc. If we show you, though, it's a lot easier to understand. Aiding motivation. Images tend to make documents seem friendlier. They also are nice because people like pictures. For example, here's a website page. Just talking about something, anything. Notice that the pictures break up that wall of words and they make it friendlier to do. Particularly, we've got James Lipton smiling at us there. Fantastic. The idea is break up the flow, make people comfortable. People like pictures, and particularly people like pictures of people doing something, using something, looking at them. We're very social type beings. Illustrations also convey values. They carry denotations and connotations. If you're not familiar with what those words mean, here's a quick definition. Denotation is a definition. It's what the word means if you look it up in the dictionary. A connotation, on the other hand, is a meaning that's carried along with. So, if we talk about images such as this, what are the denotations and connotations here? The denotation is these are Steven Tyler and Joe Perry from Aerosmith, lead singer and guitarist respectively. That's the denotation. The connotation, though, if we look at them, and the picture tells us, oh hey, what sort of values are we bringing along? These are rock stars. Look at them. They look like they like to party. They were dressed outrageously. They are sort of wild and crazy guys. See how the idea happens here? These images are conveying values that are sometimes hard to say or would take a long time to say in words. From this point forward, we're going to talk about some general tips on designing and choosing illustrations. We have a handful of ideas to consider. First off, appropriateness, then clarity, emphasis, ethics, size, and cost. We'll talk about each of these in turn. First off, appropriateness. Consider, is text, an image, or a combination of the two going to be the most effective? Here's an example. I want to talk about how to repair a lamp. Do I want all text? Do I want just a picture? Do I want both text and picture? In this particular case, there's no one right answer. However, I would suggest that if you're showing a procedure of some sort, it's often a good idea to do both pictures and text. That way you get description, you can go into detail and say, explain what to do when. The pictures are, again, as we've said and seen before, they can show information that is hard to verbalize. The combination can be very effective. You want to match the type of image that appears to whatever it is that you're talking about. So, for example, if we're going to use this image about the Game of Thrones, we've got Ned Stark, Sean Bean, the movie star, leaning on a naked sword. He's got sitting on a throne made of swords. He's dressed in sort of a medieval kind of way. He looks like he has the weight of the world on his shoulders, doesn't he? This image matches the sort of thing the series is about. Similarly, here's another picture of Sean Bean. Ned Stark looks unhappy. He's leaning on his sword, looking careworn. The type of image matches the theme of what we're talking about. Here, though, this is a dire wolf. It's a very, very large and now extinct animal. Huge, huge wolf. This thing is the symbol of Ned Stark's house. Does it have anything to do with Game of Thrones? Yes, it does. Is this particular image appropriate, though? No, it's not. This is a scientific illustration, whereas this here is an expressive sort of arty thing. The two just don't match up. You want to follow the established conventions of tables and charts and graphs and the like when you display them. So, for example, here's a nice one. What is it saying? Does it take you a minute to say what's going on here? Now, if we look at it, we can say, oh, it's going down because it's talking about losses of money. 0, -1, -2. Oh, I see. But you're making your reader think. Similarly, here's another one. This is a web of ideas. If this were done on a computer screen, you could click on one of the words, drag it with your mouse, and the whole thing would rotate and show you what's attached to what, what's closer to what, and so on. Kind of a neat idea. But at the same time, both of these are not entirely intuitive, are they? When you're talking about putting in figures or tables, try to follow the established conventions. If you get too creative, you may lose your reader behind, and they just won't be able to use or appreciate the document. You want to use contrasting colors when you put together a table or a figure. Bright colors and dark shades are going to attract the most attention. So if we look at a weather map, for example, that's the classic light and dark. We've also got this thing here. This is supposed to be a 3D representation in 2 dimensions of a 3-dimensional surface. But it's so dark it's hard to see what's going on, isn't it? It needs more contrast. You want to follow the PARC rules of design: proximity, alignment, repetition, and contrast. That's all we'll say about that for the moment, because we've talked about it already. You want to omit what we call non-data ink or chart junk. Here's a good example. Here's an image that's talking about the comparisons between math, reading, and language arts scores for people who do and don't have bedroom TVs and do and don't have home computers. That's fine and dandy. But let's talk about the non-data ink, though. Look at the background first. It's a computer mouse. What does that have to do with a bedroom TV or no bedroom TV? Nothing whatsoever. What does it have to do with home computer and no home computer? Well, you use a mouse with a computer, okay, great, but does it help relate to the data itself? Does it make a difference in how you interpret the results? No. It's just decoration. We could get rid of it, and the graph would actually be easier to read. Take a look at the bars as well. They're sort of, they look like a half a cylinder, and they got a beveled edge. Why are they like that? Is there any reason for it? No, it's just art. You're probably better off using just a two-dimensional display. It'd be faster, easier, also easier to read and understand. Whenever you put together an image, refer to that illustration in the text. You want to explain the content and the relevance, so don't just jam in a picture and assume that the reader will understand why it's there. Refer to it in the text. Say this, refer to see figure 1, see figure 2, etc. Also, when you're saying see figure 1, see figure 2, you want to refer to the illustration before it appears. You can't always, depending on the layout, but the point is, if you can refer, then the person will say, figure? What figure? Oh, that figure right there that's coming up. Ah, versus, what is this thing? Having to read on and read on and read on before you get to the point. You also want to place illustrations close to relevant parts of the text. Here's an example of kind of what we were talking about before. In this case, we've got an algorithm up at top, and we've got some text talking about the algorithm. So, for example, the caption will say, fast heuristic algorithm partitioning, blah, 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 blah. In the text later, it says, in algorithm 3, we present such a top-down approach, blah, 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 blah. Notice, even though the image appears first, the text is right close behind it. This is from a professional journal, and it has some pretty strict formatting requirements. Would it be nicer to put the text up at top and the image down below? Probably. But for the purposes of this, notice that the two things are very close together. You also want to label your illustrations. First off, you want to use a very descriptive title. For example, do you think all transactions at banks are FDIC insured, or are only some of them insured? It's a very descriptive title, isn't it? It tells you exactly what's going on. Versus if the caption said, figure 2, survey responses. Great, what survey, what's it about, etc. Be as descriptive as you possibly can anytime that you label an illustration. You also want to sequence your tables and figures separately. If we take a look at this, we see that over here we have figure 4, over here we have table 1. This tells us that there was already a figure 1, figure 2, and figure 3 before we even got to table 1. Number or letter these things in order, but number or letter them separately. You also want to place the labels in consistent locations. Here's an example that we pulled off online. Take a look at the red arrows. Notice each of them is aligned with the left margin of the thing that it is attached with. So figure 1 aligned with the left margin of that image. Table 1 aligned with the left margin of that table. Also, there are no hard and fast rules. You can align them, you can center them, what have you, but generally speaking, usually figures are going to be labeled at the bottom, tables are going to be labeled at the top. You want to put blank space around illustrations. If we take a look at this particular PDF file, we look at it and say, oh, it's got both tables and illustrations. Where is the blank space? It's there, it's there, it's there, it's there, and it's there. Notice things are set apart from the main text so that they don't run into it. They're close by, but they're far enough so we can tell it's not smashed up and belonging to it directly. You want to highlight or foreground things that are important to the reader. You can use that through callouts, arrows, and text boxes. The key is, don't go overboard when you do these things. Here's an example. If we look at this pop-up window, it has 3 callouts. Is that a good amount? What do you think? In this particular case, it works kind of nicely. The things are pointing to elements that are far apart enough that the various callouts aren't running into each other. They're easily separable by the eye, like, oh, this is here, this is here. Okay, fantastic. Different. Easily told apart. What if, though, you had 5, 6, 7 callouts? Ooh, that'd be kind of crazy, wouldn't it? It would just be over the top. What if we went the other way and said, I only want 1 callout per image? Then we have 1 image with best practice include a caption title. 1 image looks exactly the same, except it has the callout that says data tables require both row and column numbers, headers. Then another image, data tables must have a summary, avoid lengthy details. Well, very nice, but that would take up a lot of room, wouldn't it? Your reader has to also go through each of these things separately. So feel free to put more than 1 arrow, more than 1 callout, more than 1 text box associated with a table or an illustration. The point is, though, don't go nuts with it. Use good judgment. You want to exclude images that would be interpreted as excluding people. For example, we see a picture of police. What does this tell you? They're all men, mostly white men too. So if you were a woman, would you possibly get a job here? Maybe not. If you were of an ethnic minority, do you think the police might be sympathetic toward you? You'd hope so, but the picture wouldn't necessarily say so. The thing is, when you put images together, make sure that they're inclusive rather than exclusive. You also want to avoid stereotypical images. Famous examples: Newsweek and Time covers, same picture, one on the left Newsweek unretouched, the one on the right retouched. On the right, OJ is looking very dark and dangerous, isn't he? We don't want to do things like this. Avoid stereotyping people. You also want to avoid inhumane images. What do we mean by that? We want to bring in the idea that people are involved if there ever are people involved. For example, here's a pie chart showing how the fatalities break down in the coal mining industry. Well, let's see. For 17% of the people who died had been on the job 21 or more years. Well, that's very sad, but does it give any idea that this is actually people? What is a pie chart? People are not slices of pie. Also, notice what's going on here. This is a 3D pie chart, isn't it? Because it's tilted over so that we have this 3D effect in the foreground, that 21 plus the 17% looks smaller than it actually is. It's not only taking away from their humanity, it's minimizing the humanity of what happened here. Look at the cheery colors as well. Does this say death? No, it doesn't. Not at all. You want to follow copyright law. If you're going to use an image of some sort, even a table, and you need to either create, cite, or pay for the thing. So, if we're going to use Mickey Mouse, can I use him here legally? Oh, this is a good question. I can use him because of fair use. I'm using it to educate you. I'm not making a buck off this. But if you were going to use some sort of trademark copyrighted image, can't just go ahead and use it. Got to pay for it. Distorted images are a big problem as well. Here's a famous example. What's wrong with her? Let's see. Oh, I know. Her head is bigger than her waist. Can this actually happen? Oh my, no. Big problem here. Don't distort images, don't change images. Show things as they really are. Speaking of showing things as they really are, you want to use realistic scales when you show things like graphs and charts. So if we're looking at the differences on the TOPS tax rate between now and January 1st, 2013, when the Bush tax cuts expire, wow, look at that jump, it's huge! Oh, wait, from 34%, and that max is 42%, so the big difference here, 35 to 39, we are looking at 4.6%. If we showed this on a scale from 0 to 100, like percentages are, that would be a tiny, tiny little bit. So we've got a distorted, unrealistic scale here. Make sure that you are not magnifying differences that are actually very small. Show objects as they actually exist. Another famous example, Drew Barrymore in a CoverGirl ad. Ooh, those are she used mascara. Look at those. All sorts of eyelashes. They're sticking out and make her eyes pop. Oh, but wait. Lash inserts reply to add lash count. Yeah, not ethical at all. Particularly when we're talking about technical communication, avoid things like this. Remember, you are not salespeople. Your idea is that you want to articulate information in the most understandable and clear and accurate method possible. Choose your illustration sizes very wisely. When you put an illustration in, you have to make sure that the image is big enough to see details. Something like this, we can't see it at this size. Even if we blew it up, it would be really, really busy. The scale is too small, so this particular thing would need to be redone entirely. If you need to, you can use a full landscape orientation if you have a full page figure table. If you take a look at this, on the right hand side, crane your neck over, 488, Biometrics, September 1964. This is a page from a journal article that appeared, and do you think this would be able to fit if you tried to do it vertically? No, the portrait orientation won't work at all. Go ahead, you can use landscape orientation as need be, but try to do it only for full page things. Choose the size of your illustration very wisely. If it's a really big image, it's going to be kind of silly. And also, big images cost money to print, both for ink and in terms of just page space that they're having to pay for the dead trees. This particular image comes from homestarrunner.com. It's an old internet cartoon. It's talking about how to write an English paper. It's a very funny cartoon if you're of the mind to look it up. You want to minimize the file size if you can, but you want to avoid making your images grainy. If you compress things down too far, you lose resolution. At the same time, if you leave your images really, really big, you get massive, massive files. It can choke your computer, make it run really slowly and or crash. Cost is a huge problem as well in talking about illustrations. You want to try to limit the costs whenever you can, because the costs will add up quickly. Page space, money. Color printing, lots of money. Graphic artist time, oh my, even more money. An image that is poorly done or conceived, it's going to do two things. First off, it's going to increase your customer service costs. If your customers cannot use the thing, they're going to call in, and your company has to pay for that. Also, people will be unhappy, and they will tell their friends, their neighbors, anyone who is associated with them on Twitter, on Facebook, what have you, on social media, hey, I tried the Widget Master, it didn't work. I tried to use the illustration, the pictures in the guide, they didn't show it, I broke my thing, I want my money back. See, you're going to drive away future customers as well. So, think about what you're doing very carefully before you start putting together images, before you start putting together tables. You want to make sure you do it right the first time. Let's take a look at some examples of illustrations. We have tables. Oh, wait. We have tables. It's not a fantastic table, but it's a table. It works. Here's another table, rows and columns. Another very famous table that you have sometimes used in your science classes. A table that you use almost every day, I'm willing to bet. We have a bar chart. These ones are very good for showing differences between amounts of things. In particular, notice this one is going horizontally. This will allow us to compare quantities of items. If we go vertically, we can compare quantities of items, but it's better going over a scale of time. So if we're going horizontally, usually a snapshot at one time. Vertically, some sort of a time has elapsed between the first, second, and third. We can go multiple bars as well. We can do segmented bars. In case you aren't familiar with one of these, a segmented bar, each bar is an entire unit, and then the different parts will break it down in percentages. It's sort of a different take on a pie chart, if you would. We can do pictographs. Pictographs are sort of like columns in a bar chart, but instead of just bars, it's showing images of the thing we're talking about. A single line. We can do a graph like this, but make sure that if you're going to do a single line, the deal is your data has to be continuous. You cannot have discrete data. You have to have continuous data. One links to the next, to the next, to the next. We have a classic Cartesian plane. We can do multiple lines. Multiple lines are useful for showing how different things that are supposedly related vary over time related to each other. We can also do a pie chart. A pie chart, as you probably know, is showing percentages about 100%. So each slice is a chunk that represents that much percent. Please note that it's common practice to start at 12 o'clock and then move around clockwise from biggest to smallest. You've probably seen differences, and sometimes there are reasons for doing it differently, but that's fairly standard. The big deal when you're dealing with the pie chart, try to do it in major chunks. Don't do too many small little slices, otherwise it's really, really hard to read and it becomes a mush. Also, as we've talked about before, in terms of having the foreshortening, where the back is leaned over for the show a three-dimensional, it doesn't help readability, understandability, so try not to do it. Gantt charts. Gantt charts are kind of neat. They're good for showing the progress on projects. The way it works is on the left we've got a list of categories. We've got particular tasks, task 1, task 2, task 3, etc. And on the right hand side we've got a list of dates. In between the two, where the graph is, you have various bars. The bars say I am starting on this date, I am ending on this date. The red line in the middle says here is today, and the colored parts say what has happened. So if we look at task category 1, the top line, we see that it's supposed to start on 1/1/07. It's supposed to end on 3/19/07. Where the dotted line is, the blue says they are a little ahead of schedule and they have just a little bit of the gray left to do. These are really very useful. Flowcharts. These count as illustrations. You've probably seen them before. What should I do? How should I go about it? Decision trees. Speaking of decision trees, here's another decision tree. It's very similar to a flowchart, but instead of saying a procedure, it is more a case of what action should I take if this is the case. Organizational charts are also very common. Maps. They're an interesting kind of illustration. I particularly like this one. Notice we've got California, and then inset into it there's a box. That box is what we're showing here on the map itself. So this is a kind of neat map with a call-out. Here's another map. This is a very famous one showing Napoleon's march on Moscow. At the left, he's leaving. The width is the size of his army, represented in how wide that thing is. As it goes along toward the east, it narrows and narrows and narrows. Notice, by the time it gets to Moscow, his army is about the third of the size than it was. After he has to retreat from Moscow, coming back, the black lines, thinner, 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 thinner. Look how very few people came back from that original army. This is a very good map. It's also interesting because it's an information graphic that shows changes over time. If you also look at the bottom that there is a line graph there, that is actually a temperature graph. That's a little hard to read, and I know you can't do it very well on screen here, but it's showing how bitterly, bitterly cold that winter was. Neat, neat graph. Schematics are also very common. If you aren't familiar with a schematic, what it does is it shows here's a piece of machinery, here's an object of some sort, and here are the various parts and how do they work together. What's the process? You also have line drawings. Line drawings are, as you've probably seen before, just sketches. They can be rough sketches, they can be really well done sketches. Point is, they're just one color. You don't necessarily need full color all the time. In particular, if we look at these cubes, would it matter if they were done in color? It wouldn't help our understanding any, no. So line drawings work just fine in this case. We have exploded views. If you're not familiar with an exploded view, it's taking all the parts of a device and just pulling them apart, hanging them in space so you can see how they fit together. We have cutaway views. Cutaway view is some sort of object with a chunk taken out of it so we can see inside at the inner workings. We also have cross sections. A cross section is similar to a cutaway view, but it is just sliced in half and said, here's what it looks like on the inside. There's no cut away to look into, it's just the entire object sliced. These cross sections can be illustrations like this, drawings. They can be photographs of real things. Which is better? It depends. If you want to know the abstract, perhaps this might be better. If you need to know what it actually looks like, this might be better. In any case, choose your audience and the context. Cartoons are very useful as well. This particular one, this is the thing that is included with every piece of IKEA furniture. They're selling to multiple audiences all across the world, so they don't all speak English, or Swedish, as they can actually, because it's a Swedish company. They've created this image. People can look at it and understand. They don't need words. Cartoons can also have problems. Whereas the IKEA cartoon worked very well, this particular one has ethical problems. What is this cartoon telling us? It appears to be telling us that in order to be a secretary, a woman, and it has to be a woman, must have 80s permed hair, wear a really, really tight skirt, and have tiny, tiny, itsy-bitsy little feet. The first time I ever saw this particular cartoon, it was sent on sent out as part of a job ad. It was a huge version of this cartoon, took up about half a sheet of paper, and then at the bottom of the sheet of paper it said, such and such department at blank university is looking for a student assistant. Sure, we could say this is a student assistant, but is this saying that women are only wanted, and in particular white women? Oh, gee, yeah, it's kind of a problem, isn't it? So, you can use cartoons. This particular one is from the free Microsoft ClipArt gallery. You can use ClipArt, but please beware, it is often ethically challenged. Color photographs are often very useful. Imagine if this was a black and white photograph. It could work, but it's not necessarily representative of what's going on. With color, though, yeah, it'll work nicely. The one catch here in the color photograph, notice that the frisbee is blending into the background. That can be a problem. So when you're discussing, do I want a line drawing, do I want a full color illustration, do I want a color photograph, think about the composition of the thing. What are you trying to focus on? Are you focusing on just the thing in the foreground, or do you need the background, and is the background going to be distracting? Sometimes it's more appropriate to use just a plain black and white photograph. When you're talking about photographing the moon, black and white is often just fine because when we look up at the sky, it shows up to us in black and white. That being said, if you're going to do something like the moon rising over the trees and the moon appears to be glowing orange, I've seen many pictures like that. They're beautiful, fine. Use color. But for all the purposes, consider, do I need color? If you don't, just go for black and white. Whatever you do, though, please make sure you choose carefully. You want to be very careful to choose something that is appropriate for your audience and the thing that you're talking about, because the wrong kind of image can just give the wrong idea altogether. That'll do for now. There are more things we could talk about, but this particular video lecture has discussed all the elements that will help you get started into making wise choices when it comes to inserting tables, charts, graphs, images, and the like.